The first thing I heard after surgeons repaired the ruptured artery in my brain was my wife telling a neurologist, "If he crashes again, don't put him through another operation. Let him go." I was 70 years old, not 90. And before the aneurysm dropped me beside the workbench in my garage, I had still been going to Mercer Equipment before sunrise, 3 mornings a week, climbing into forklifts, arguing over invoices, and refusing every suggestion that I retire. My name is Thomas Mercer, and for 43 years I had built a construction equipment rental business outside Knoxville, Tennessee, from one used backhoe and a borrowed pickup into 3 yards, 72 employees, and enough land that developers called me every few months asking whether I was finally ready to sell. I had always given them the same answer: not yet. Now I was lying in intensive care with a breathing tube down my throat, my eyelids too heavy to lift, and my right hand refusing to obey me, while my wife of 38 years explained to a doctor what I supposedly wanted. Tom was terrified of becoming dependent, Linda said. He told me more than once he wouldn't want extraordinary measures. That was not true. I had told her I did not want to spend years alive with no awareness and no chance of recovery. I had never told her to give up on me after one bad week. The doctor said my scans looked better than expected, and that it was too early to make permanent decisions. Linda thanked him in the soft voice she used at church funerals. I heard his shoes leave the room. A few seconds later, another chair scraped across the floor, and my son leaned close enough that I recognized the faint whistle in his breathing from a broken nose he got playing high school baseball. "Did he sign the incapacity certification?" Owen asked. My wife whispered, "One doctor did. We still need the second." My son waited a moment, then asked the question that changed everything. "Once the second one signs, can we close Cedar Ridge without Dad?" My heartbeat jumped so hard, I heard the monitor speed up beside me. Cedar Ridge was our oldest yard, 28 acres on the edge of a growing industrial corridor. Land I had bought when Owen was 9, and everybody told me I was an idiot for paying for dirt that far from town. I had turned down a $6 million offer for it the previous spring. I had also told my son, very clearly, that the property would not be sold while I was alive and competent to make the decision. My wife said, "Keep your voice down. Your sister will be here soon." Owen replied, "The buyer won't hold forever. If Dad comes home and starts asking questions, we lose the window." I tried to open my eyes. Nothing. I tried to move my fingers. My body felt as if it belonged to another man. Then my wife said, "We only need enough time to get the authority in place. After that, we can tell him it was necessary." That was the moment I stopped fighting to wake up. I didn't know what authority she meant, who the buyer was, or why my son seemed more worried about a real estate closing than whether his father would ever walk again. I only knew that if they realized I could hear them, every honest word in that room would disappear. So I lay still while my wife held my wrist and told me, in the same voice she had used for 38 years, "Just rest, honey. We're taking care of everything." For the first time in my life, those words frightened me. By the second night, pieces of the conversation had begun fitting together. My daughter, Megan, came in after work and cried quietly beside my bed. She was 39, a middle school counselor, the only one of my children who had never taken a paycheck from Mercer Equipment. I heard her ask my wife why a lawyer had called about an incapacity affidavit. Linda told her it was routine. Megan said, "Routine for what?" Owen answered before my wife could. "For keeping the company from freezing up while Dad's like this." My daughter asked whether that meant temporary authority to pay employees and vendors. Nobody answered quickly enough. Then she said, "You're not selling Cedar Ridge." My son's voice hardened. "We're not having this argument here." Megan said, "There shouldn't be an argument. Dad already said no." My wife told them both to stop, but for the first time since my surgery, I felt something other than fear. At least one person in that room still remembered I had a voice. That relief lasted maybe 30 seconds. Owen said the company had debt, payroll exposure, insurance renewals, and a market opportunity I was too stubborn to understand. He said selling 1 yard would give Mercer Equipment room to breathe. Megan asked how much the buyer was paying. My son said, "Enough." She asked who the buyer was. He said, "A development group." Then my wife told my daughter, "Your father built the company for the family." Sometimes protecting what he built means making decisions he would resist because he hates change. That sentence hurt more than the one about letting me go. Linda did not sound greedy. She sounded convinced. That made her more dangerous. Because a person who knows she is stealing may hesitate, but a person who believes she is saving you can justify almost anything. Megan said, "Then wait until he wakes up and ask him." Owen snapped. "And if he wakes up confused? If he can't even sign his name? What then?" There was silence, followed by the sound of paper being folded. My son lowered his voice. "The trust language is clear. 2 physicians certify incapacity. Mom's power becomes active, and she can delegate business authority to me." I knew exactly which document he meant. 12 years earlier, after a friend suffered a massive stroke, I had created a springing power of attorney that would activate only if 2 independent doctors determined I could no longer manage my affairs. Linda was the primary agent. Owen was alternate. It was supposed to protect me from strangers if I ever truly lost capacity. I had never imagined my family might start treating the document like a finish line. The next afternoon, a nurse asked me to squeeze her fingers if I understood her. My hand finally responded with the weakest pressure I could manage. I heard excitement in her voice, and for a second I wanted to grip as hard as I could, open my eyes, and demand every piece of paper in the building. Then I remembered Owen saying, "If Dad comes home and starts asking questions, we lose the window." I loosened my fingers. When the neurologist tested me later, I gave him enough response to show improvement, but not enough to prove how much awareness had returned. It was a strange feeling, hiding inside my own body while the people around me decided what version of me they wanted to believe in. 2 days later, I opened my eyes. Linda cried so hard she shook. Owen hugged me and called me old man the way he had when he was 20. Megan pressed her forehead to mine and whispered, "You scared me, Dad." I could not speak clearly because my throat was raw and my right side was weak, but my mind was sharp. When the doctor asked what year it was, I intentionally gave him the year before correcting myself. When he asked where I was, I paused long enough to make Linda glance at Owen. I saw the look pass between them. Concern, yes, but beneath it something else. Calculation. I spent 6 more days in the hospital and 11 in rehabilitation. Every day I improved. Every day I let my family believe the improvement was slower than it really was. Owen began bringing company updates that contained almost no numbers. Linda opened my mail before handing it to me. Whenever I asked about Cedar Ridge, my son smiled and said, "Nothing you need to worry about while you're healing." Megan, on the other hand, watched me differently. One evening, when she was helping me walk the rehabilitation hallway, she waited until no one else was nearby and said, "Dad, do you remember anything from ICU?" I looked at her face for a long moment. I wanted to tell her everything. Instead, I rasped, "Bits." Her eyes filled. She squeezed my arm and whispered, "Then don't sign anything until you talk to somebody who isn't family." She did not say another word about it. She didn't have to. I came home 3 weeks after the aneurysm with a cane, a bottle of blood pressure medicine, and a family that thought I could barely balance a checkbook. I let them keep thinking it. Linda moved my laptop from the den because she said screens made me tired. Owen changed the password to the company's remote accounting portal for security and told me he would restore my access when the doctor cleared me for work. I smiled, thanked him for carrying the burden, and watched relief loosen his shoulders. At night, I practiced walking without the cane after Linda went to bed. I wrote down every conversation I remembered from ICU, including the exact phrases about the second doctor, the buyer, the authority, and the closing window. On the 6th morning after I returned home, I told Linda I wanted to drive to the diner for coffee. She said I was not ready. I told her I would stay within 5 miles. She finally agreed after making me promise to text when I arrived. I drove past the diner and continued another 12 miles to a brick office building near downtown Knoxville, where a woman named Claire Donnelly practiced elder law and commercial litigation. Claire had represented one of my suppliers years earlier in a partnership dispute. She had never worked for Mercer Equipment and had never represented anyone in my family, which was exactly why I chose her. I told her everything from the hospital. She did not react when I described Linda's statement about another operation. She did not react when I described Owen asking about Cedar Ridge. She took notes until I mentioned the two-doctor incapacity requirement. Then she stopped writing. "Have you seen either certification?" she asked. I told her no. "Do they know how much you remember?" I said no. "Keep it that way for now." Claire explained that if the springing power had been activated improperly, we needed to know who signed, what information they relied on, and whether anyone had already used the authority. She also told me something I needed to hear. Wanting to sell property I owned was not proof of a crime. Being selfish was not proof of fraud. Even Linda's awful conversation with the doctor, by itself, did not establish financial wrongdoing. "If we do this," Claire said, "we separate what hurts from what can be proved." That sentence kept me from driving straight to Mercer Equipment and throwing my son out by lunchtime. Claire brought in a forensic accountant named Daniel Cho, a quiet man who looked at records the way mechanics look at engines. Because I still legally owned a controlling interest in the company, Claire arranged a narrow review using copies of bank statements and public filings available without alerting Owen. Within 4 days, Daniel found something called Quarry Ridge Advisory Services. I had never heard of it. Mercer Equipment had paid Quarry Ridge 14 times in 18 months for market strategy, fleet optimization, and site consultation. The total was $312,400. Daniel showed me the corporate registration. Quarry Ridge was owned by my daughter-in-law, Beth, and her brother, Caleb Monroe, a real estate broker who had been trying for years to get me to sell land. I stared at the page until the letters blurred. Owen had married Beth 11 years earlier. I had given them the down payment on their first home, and later helped Caleb lease equipment when his first development project nearly failed. Claire asked whether Quarry Ridge had actually provided services. I said I had never approved the company as a vendor. Daniel cautioned that this alone did not prove the invoices were false. 2 days later, he had the supporting documents. Several reports billed at more than $20,000 were copied from free market data. 1. Fleet efficiency study listed equipment Mercer Equipment had sold 3 years earlier. The invoices had been approved by Owen. 6 also carried a second digital authorization from Linda. I felt anger rise, but Claire made me sit on it. She asked whether Linda understood what she was approving. I said I didn't know. That uncertainty mattered. The next discovery mattered more. Blue Heron Development, the group supposedly waiting to buy Cedar Ridge, had been formed only 4 months earlier. Its mailing address led to Caleb's brokerage office. The proposed purchase price was $3.25 million. Daniel had already obtained 2 recent industrial land comparisons, placing Cedar Ridge between $6.1 and $6.8 million before improvements. Then he found an email attached to a lender packet describing Blue Heron's plan to flip the property to a national storage company for an estimated $7.6 million after closing. My son was not trying to save the company by selling land. He was trying to move one of my most valuable assets into a vehicle controlled by his wife's family, then profit from the resale. But even then, Claire would not let me confront him. "You still need to know how they plan to get your signature out of the way," she said. The answer arrived the following Tuesday. One physician had completed a preliminary incapacity form while I was intubated. The second certification had not come from my treating neurologist. It had come from a doctor I had never met, using an evaluation summary that claimed I had shown persistent cognitive disorientation at a time when no such examination had been performed. Claire's investigator traced the referral to a private geriatric consultant whose office had received records from Owen's attorney. The certification was weak enough to challenge, but what chilled me was the date. It had been signed 2 days after I opened my eyes. That evening I returned home and found Linda at the kitchen island paying bills. She looked up and smiled. "How was coffee?" she asked. I told her it was good. She asked whether I had remembered where I parked. I laughed because that was the version of me she needed, a 70-year-old man grateful for small victories. Then I noticed a blue folder, partly hidden under a grocery circular. The words, "Cedar Ridge Closing," were visible on the tab. My wife followed my eyes, closed the folder, and said, "Just company paperwork Owen dropped off." I nodded. "Probably over my head right now." She reached across the island and covered my hand. You don't have to carry everything anymore, Tom. For almost 4 decades, I would have heard love in that sentence. That night, I heard permission she had given herself. 2 days later, Megan came by while Linda was at a dentist appointment. My daughter brought soup, sat across from me, and said, "I need to know how much you understand." I looked at her and said, clearly, without the halting speech I had been using around the others, "Enough." She put down her spoon and started crying. I knew it. I told her not to assume I trusted her just because she had warned me. Her face tightened, but she nodded. "You shouldn't." Then she handed me her phone. On the screen were photographs of documents from a family meeting Owen had held while I was still in rehabilitation. One was a draft affidavit saying the family unanimously agreed I was unable to manage financial decisions. Megan's signature line was blank. Another was an email from Owen to Beth and Linda. "As soon as the second certification is accepted, Mom can delegate authority and we can close before he is discharged." A third message from Linda said, "I hate doing this behind him, but if he comes back angry and cancels everything, Owen could lose the house." I read that line twice. Megan told me the part I had not known. Owen was drowning. 18 months earlier, he and Beth had personally guaranteed loans for 2 townhouse developments with Caleb. Material costs rose, a contractor failed, and one project stalled. They owed more than $2 million across business loans and personal guarantees. Quarry Ridge had become a way to pull money from Mercer equipment without calling it a loan. Selling Cedar Ridge cheaply to Blue Heron would give Owen and Beth's family a profit large enough to rescue their projects. Linda had discovered the debt the previous winter. Instead of telling me, she started helping him. "Mom said you'd fire him," Megan told me. "She said you'd make him face consequences when what he needed was time." I closed my eyes. That sounded exactly like my wife. Linda had spent her whole life confusing rescue with love. When Owen was 8 and broke a neighbor's window, she paid for it before I could make him mow lawns. When he wrecked his first truck at 17, she lied and told me the road was icy. When his first marriage collapsed, she blamed everybody but him. I had thought those were small disagreements between parents. Now the same instinct had grown teeth. Megan said Owen asked her to sign the affidavit and she refused. Linda begged her, saying family loyalty mattered more than paperwork. Megan still refused. "Why didn't you call me?" I asked. "You were barely speaking," she said. "Then they told me. The doctor said stress could cause another bleed. I thought maybe they were right that you needed protection. I didn't know about Quarry Ridge until last week." Her voice broke. I was wrong for waiting. I believed her, but I did not absolve her on the spot. I had learned something in the hospital about people who make decisions for you while telling themselves it is for your own good. I told her, "If you want to help me, don't confront your mother or your brother. Give Claire everything." She blinked. "Who's Claire?" I smiled for the first time in days. "Somebody who doesn't share our last name." Over the next week, Claire and Daniel built the rest of the picture. Linda had not taken money for herself. She had approved 6 Quarry Ridge invoices, because Owen told her they were temporary transfers he would repay. She had also pressured my longtime family doctor to support the incapacity process, but he refused without examining me. That was why Owen's attorney found another physician. Linda's motives were not the same as my son's, but her choices were still hers. Owen, meanwhile, had gone further. He had used my hospitalization to prepare a board resolution, giving himself expanded authority, had begun negotiating the Cedar Ridge sale before I collapsed, and had sent Caleb a message the morning after my aneurysm saying, "This may solve the timing problem." When Daniel showed me those 5 words, something inside me settled. Until then, a small part of me had kept looking for the boy who once waited beside my truck every Saturday morning because he wanted to go to work with Dad. After that message, I stopped searching. The following Monday, I stopped pretending long enough to protect myself. Claire arranged for me to be evaluated independently by a neurologist and neuropsychologist, with no connection to my family. I completed memory tests, financial reasoning questions, executive function assessments, and a 2-hour interview that left me more tired than a 12-hour shift ever had. Both doctors concluded that while I still had mild weakness and fatigue from the aneurysm, I was mentally capable of managing my personal and business affairs. Claire immediately served notice, disputing the incapacity certifications and suspending any reliance on the springing power of attorney until the matter could be reviewed. We restored my direct access to company banking, froze new vendor payments to Quarry Ridge, and notified our bank that no property transaction involving Cedar Ridge could close without my personal confirmation. I did not move money to punish anyone. I did not hide assets from Linda. Claire was strict about that. Every step had to protect what I owned, without turning me into the kind of person my family could later accuse of acting irrationally. I also called a special meeting of the Mercer Equipment Board for the following Friday. Owen received the notice and called me within 20 minutes. I answered in the slow voice he expected. "Dad, what is this?" he asked. I told him Claire had suggested we review company authority now that I was recovering. He went silent. "Claire who?" I said. "A lawyer." The silence changed. He asked whether I had been talking to lawyers without him. I told him I was 70 years old and still allowed to make a phone call. He tried to laugh. "Of course you are. I just don't want anybody taking advantage of you while you're vulnerable." I nearly admired the sentence. My son had spent weeks trying to make me legally vulnerable, and now he was using vulnerability to warn me about someone else. I told him I wanted the meeting at Cedar Ridge because I had not seen the yard since my surgery. He objected immediately. "That site is a mess right now. Let's meet at headquarters." I said Cedar Ridge. For the next 4 days, my family unraveled without knowing I was watching. Linda asked whether Claire was trying to change my estate. I told her we were discussing basic protections. Owen came to the house twice and tried to persuade me to postpone the meeting. Beth called once, something she almost never did, and said she was worried I was being pushed back into work too quickly. Megan said nothing to any of them. She kept taking my calls from her car and forwarded documents to Claire. On Thursday evening, Linda finally sat across from me in the living room and asked, "Do you remember the hospital?" I did not answer right away. She watched my face. "Tom, I need to know." I said, "Why?" Her eyes filled. She told me she had been terrified. She said when the doctor explained the possibility of permanent impairment, all she could think about was not letting me become trapped in a body I would hate. I believed that part. Then she said she had only helped Owen because his projects were collapsing, and she knew I would refuse to rescue him. "You always make people live with their mistakes," she whispered. "Sometimes family is supposed to save each other." I looked at the woman who had slept beside me for 38 years and said, "Saving him? With whose company?" She froze. I let my voice return fully, every word clean. "Saving him with whose land, Linda?" Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. For the first time since I woke after surgery, my wife understood exactly how much of me had come back. She asked how long I had known. I said, "Long enough." Then I told her the board meeting was still happening. She begged me not to destroy Owen publicly. I told her the only thing I intended to destroy was the idea that love gave any of them permission to use my signature, my illness, or my company without my consent. Friday morning, Cedar Ridge looked almost exactly as it had the day I bought it 31 years earlier. Except the gravel lot was paved now, and the little cinder block office had become a 2-story operations building. I arrived 20 minutes early with Claire, Daniel, and 2 independent board members who had worked with me for decades. Megan came separately and sat near the back. Linda arrived with Owen and Beth. My son walked into the conference room carrying a leather portfolio and stopped when he saw Claire. "What is she doing here?" he asked. I told him she represented me. He looked at the board members, then at Megan, and seemed to understand that the meeting he thought he could manage had already moved beyond him. I began without raising my voice. I told everyone that I had called the meeting for 3 reasons: to confirm who controlled Mercer Equipment, to review transactions involving Quarry Ridge, and to terminate negotiations involving Cedar Ridge. Owen interrupted immediately. "You're not healthy enough to make that call." Claire slid 2 medical evaluations across the table. "Actually, he is." My son barely glanced at them. He said doctors had already certified my incapacity. Claire placed the disputed forms beside the evaluations and explained that one certification had been made without a valid examination and was being formally challenged. Then Daniel opened a binder. The room stayed quiet as he walked through 14 payments, totaling $312,400 to Quarry Ridge Advisory Services. Beth said her company had performed legitimate consulting. Daniel asked her to explain why one report described 6 machines, Mercer equipment, no longer owned. She stared at him. He turned to another page, showing identical language from a public industry newsletter. Owen said everybody borrowed standard wording. Daniel moved to the Blue Heron records. The proposed purchase price appeared on the screen. $3.25 million. Then the independent valuation. More than $6 million. Then the correspondence describing the planned resale. Above $7 million. One of my board members leaned back and whispered, "Good Lord." Owen's face changed. He stopped talking like my worried son and started talking like a man defending a deal. He said Cedar Ridge was underperforming. He said liquidity mattered more than theoretical value. He said the resale was speculative. I let him finish. Then I asked one question. Why does Caleb control the buyer? Beth looked down. Owen said the structure was complicated. I asked why he had never disclosed his wife's brother's involvement. He said he had intended to. I asked why he had written after my aneurysm. This may solve the timing problem. Nobody moved. Claire placed the printed message in front of him. My son stared at it for a long time. Then he turned to Megan. "You went through my messages?" She said. "You asked me to sign a statement saying Dad couldn't make decisions." "I read what you gave me." Owen called her disloyal. Megan's face went pale, but her voice stayed steady. "No. Disloyal was asking me to help take his decision away before he could speak for himself." Linda started crying. She said she had approved payments because she believed Owen would replace the money. She admitted she had supported the incapacity process because she thought I would come home angry, fire him, and ruin his family. I told her that might have been what I would have done, but it was mine to decide. That was the sentence I had been waiting weeks to say. I turned to Owen and told him his employment was terminated effective immediately for undisclosed conflicts, unauthorized related party transactions, and conduct that had destroyed my trust. Beth protested that I could not prove theft. I agreed. That's why I'm not calling it theft. Investigators and lawyers can decide what the documents support. Claire explained that the company had already referred the questionable transactions, false certification process, and attempted conflicted property sale to the appropriate civil and financial authorities. Owen looked at me as if I had slapped him. "You called investigators on your own son?" I said. "I gave records to people whose job is to decide what they mean." He stood so fast his chair rolled into the wall. "After everything I've done for this company?" I looked around the room where I had taught him to read equipment hours, negotiate leases, and shake a customer's hand without looking away. "You worked here because I trusted you," I said. "You didn't earn the right to spend that trust like cash." He told me I was choosing a business over family. I said, "No. You chose my business as the place to solve your private problems. That was your choice, not mine." Then I turned to Linda. I told her I was not throwing her out of the house that afternoon, and I was not pretending 38 years meant nothing. But I had revoked her authority under my power of attorney and replaced it with an independent professional and Megan as backup. I had also scheduled counseling for myself, whether she came or not, because I needed to decide what kind of marriage could exist after one spouse helped another person take control of the first spouse's property. Linda covered her face. She asked whether I still loved her. I told her that was not the question she should be asking. The question was whether love without trust could carry the weight she had put on it. Finally, I turned to Megan. I told her she had also failed me by waiting. She nodded with tears in her eyes. I said, "But when you understood what was happening, you stopped it instead of taking something for yourself." I did not hand her a reward. I did not promise her the company. I simply told her I wanted time, and she said, "That's fair." For the first time in that room, somebody accepted a consequence without negotiating. 3 months later, I walked through Cedar Ridge without a cane. The yard was still mine. Mercer equipment was smaller than it might have been if I had sold, but its accounts were clean, its payroll was current, and every related party vendor now required independent review. Daniel discovered more questionable Quarry Ridge charges, and the civil case over those payments was moving through lawyers instead of through shouting matches in my kitchen. Owen had sold one of his development properties and was trying to restructure the rest of his debt. He called me twice during those months. The first time he blamed Beth's brother, the market, the banks, and even Linda. I ended the call when he ran out of people to blame. The second time, his voice was different. He said, "Dad, I kept telling myself I was borrowing against what would be mine someday." I stood beside the same fence where he had learned to drive a loader at 14 and told him, "That was the whole problem. You started treating my future death like a transfer date," he cried. I did not forgive him on command, but I did not hang up either. I told him restitution and honesty had to come before reconciliation. For once, he did not argue. Linda moved into the guest room for 6 weeks, then rented a small apartment near her sister while we went to counseling separately. She admitted something there that I had already come to understand. She had spent decades protecting our children from consequences because facing their pain made her feel like a bad mother. Helping Owen take control of the company had been the largest version of the same mistake. Whether our marriage survives is still something I am deciding, not something fear, guilt, age, or family pressure gets to decide for me. Megan visits every Sunday. She does not ask about inheritance. She asks whether I took my medicine, and I tell her not to start acting like her mother. Then we laugh, because there are some family habits worth keeping. I changed my estate plan, but not the way everybody expected. I did not leave the company automatically to any child. I created a structure that will eventually give long-term employees an ownership stake and provide education trusts for my grandchildren without handing any adult a blank check. The most important change was simpler. No family member can activate financial authority over me without independent medical review and an outside fiduciary. Before the aneurysm, I thought planning for incapacity meant choosing the people I loved most. Now I understand it also means protecting those relationships from temptation. I still remember lying in intensive care, unable to move, while my wife and son discussed what they could do once 2 doctors called me incapable. The worst part was not hearing them talk about land or money. It was hearing them speak as though my voice had already disappeared while I was still alive. Surviving taught me something I should have understood long before 70. Being a father does not mean surrendering every boundary. Being a husband does not mean signing away judgment. And loving your family does not require making it easy for them to control you when you are weak. I built Mercer Equipment because I wanted to give my family security. I almost lost it because some of them confused security with ownership. They thought the aneurysm had made me powerless. What it really did was force me to see who respected me only when I was strong enough to say no. Now, when I unlock the gate at Cedar Ridge before sunrise and hear the first engines turn over across the yard, I am grateful for the business, but I am even more grateful for something I nearly lost without dying. My life is still mine to decide.